So then, with the with the Hindu model in the Vedanta of the soul as a jiva or purusha at the center of a lotus, in which we have it encased in the Anandamaya kosha, and then that in turn is encased. The Anandamaya kosha is in turn encased within the Vijnanamaya kosha. Then there's a gap, and then on the outside there's the Pranamaya kosha, the sheath made of vital forces, the breath, soul, and the vital forces that move through, the etheric forces that move through the body, which possibly are the Chinese meridians, the same thing as that which is manipulated with acupuncture. Then on the outside of that is the Manomaya kosha. Manomaya kosha is simply the intellect. And then, of course, the outermost sheath is the actual physical exterior itself, the Annamaya kosha, the sheath made of food. And so that's the Hindu model of the soul. It has no relationship whatsoever to what we mean by the word soul in the West. They're not even vaguely similar. Although Rudolf Steiner was a German mystic who did try to adapt this model so that it would fit with Western ideas, and he changes the model in the following way. He inherits it through the theosophical channels. The theosophy was very much heavily indebted to Indian and Tibetan mysticism, and that's how Steiner's initial and early hookup with theosophy is how he encountered these ideas. And then it's crucial to note that he became disillusioned with theosophy and founded anthroposophy, which is a completely different spiritual science, as it were, that he invented and which is utterly full of genius and brilliance, unlike the impoverished, cliched, and stereotypical philosophy of Madame Blavatsky, which indeed laid the foundations with her root race theory for the Nazis, and is therefore to be flushed and discredited completely. So Steiner is a whole different ballpark. In Steiner we get the idea, the sheaths are updated in the following way. The physical body, the Annamaya kosha, is what the human body has in common with the mineral world. The bones basically are minerals, and that's the outer frame. And then immediately within that is the etheric body, and the etheric body, which is basically the Pranamaya kosha, together with the Vijnanamaya kosha, is what the human being shares in common with the plants. It's the vegetative impulse that organizes the body on its own, doesn't need any help from the brain. And then the next aspect is the astral body, and the astral body gives waking consciousness, and any animal, anything with a nervous system, Steiner says, has an astral body, so it's what we share in common with the animals, and what differentiates the animal world from the plant world. This is the astral body, and then the astral body encases the ego body. And the ego body, Steiner then later also explicates into a sentient soul, an intellectual soul, and a consciousness soul, which are threefold differentiations of it. But it's basically the ego, and it transmigrates from lifetime to lifetime. But you'll note that it's very different from the Hindu idea of the jiva, which is simply an impersonal, subtle body with karmic scars on it that determine what the lifetime of the individual is going to be next time around. It does not contain the ego or the personality, because in India there isn't any such idea. The way that the personality was differentiated and developed in Western civilization in a completely different way from the Hindus. Everything in the Indian worldview is to be imagined as a vast black hole, a sort of metaphysical black hole for demolishing, destroying, and sucking down the personality and the self with all its dharmic commitments, and simply deconstructing it and wiping it out, so it can therefore hopefully eventually attain moksha, release from the reincarnation process, so it won't be reincarnated again. Note that in the Indian model, the cosmos is in control. Everything happens to you in the Indian model. It's a passive model, and the only choice you really have in the process, the cosmos takes care of everything. If you leave it alone, you're just on a roller coaster ride, basically, and the only thing that the individual is left for is to either choose to decide or not to decide to practice yoga. And the yoga is the one tool that the Hindu has to break and cut the cosmic bonds that bind him to the shackles of this samsara, this reincarnation process. With Rudolf Steiner, on the other hand, the model is very, very much more complex and has to do with, it's similar to Jung's individuation process. The ego makes use of all these spiritual tools and mystical tools to help it with the process of becoming a unique Western individual. That's what he means by the consciousness soul aspect. The intellectual soul is simply what it sounds like. It's the monomaya kosha, and the other one, the sentient soul, is simply the senses, the sensory input. And that's Rudolf Steiner's model, and Steiner's model should be contrasted with Jung's model. In Jung's model of the self, we have the idea of, at the center of the psyche, where in the Hindu model we would expect the Atman, and where in Steiner we have the ego, but it's notice that in Steiner ego is a capital E, and it includes the ego in the sense of which we think of the personality, the I think aspect, the critical self that decides for itself what it wants, in addition to the Jungian self. At the center of the psyche is a Jungian self, a self with a capital S. It's not Atman, it's not Jiva or Purusha. Those are impersonal soul units. The self at the center of the Jungian psyche is a monad. It's an entelechy, exactly like Spengler's entelechy, his cultural soul that actualizes in each individual civilization the possible, that brings forth the possible, and which contains some reservoir of cultural DNA, as it were, that the civilization is trying to actualize through the phenotypic phenomena of its arts of form. Same thing in Jung with the individual, the Mensch-Verdun process, Verdun, Werden, the weird destiny idea, is to bring forth out of the individual, through the individuation process, everything that the self has encoded in there for the living of a life process that is unique, however, and this is what the Hindu model lacks, that is unique to the personal sense of who you are as an individual. Because remember, as Spengler nailed it, the Western metaphysic is the idea, the Western myth is the idea that each individual is a metaphysical entity, a cosmos, a species unto himself. And this is what the Jungian model preserves. It's very consistent with German thought, this idea. And so the ego, let's cast Jung for fun in the model of the sheath model and visualize the self at the center of the psyche. And if we thought of a sheath around that, we would have the collective unconscious, which is the realm that is innate to it's the basal formation of the human psyche that contains all of its instincts, residual leftovers from the reptilian brainstem, and on top of that, the mammalian brain, and then the early cultural residua as well, from the days of the Neanderthals on down, and it's innate, and these are the stereotypical forms from out of which the mythological imagination comes, is in this collective unconscious. All the archetypes are in there, and they are a priori. They are equivalent to Kantian's a priori structures, except that these are the a priori structures of the imagination. And so the collective unconscious is there, and then on the outer ring of that we have the personal unconscious, which is of course the Freudian unconscious, which is empirical. It's not a priori. It's empirical because it's biographically built up empirically, as though the mind were a blank slate in Freud, and the traumatic experiences are stored up in there and repressed, which later cause neuroses, or in worst case scenarios, psychoses. And so that's the outermost ring there, and then even out beside that is the persona, what Jung calls the mask that you wear in society. I'm wearing a mask right now, the mask of the intellect on YouTube, but this is nothing compared to what I am in real life. I have a family with a child and a good sense of humor that never comes across on these videos. It's a completely different personality than the persona. The persona is simply a role that you assume that has certain limitations that enables you to function in a certain way in society. That's the Jungian sense of the sheaths. It's a very Faustian model because it's tailor-made for the individual, and each individual self is going to have a different life program because each individual task in the West is unique. This is why, and Ken Wilber gets this completely wrong, this is why Jungian psychology is not compatible with yoga, as the New Agers think. They're two different systems with totally different aims. The yogic model is to demolish, it's entirely impersonal, and the Hindu sense of self in the first place is totally impersonal anyway. The mask, the persona, what in Jung is the persona, is the Hindu personality in Indian civilization. It's extremely impersonal, it's based on duties, dharma, obligations to society, and that is what is being destroyed and wiped out in yoga. So yoga is a more or less, as far as the personality goes, it's an anti-individuation process. It breaks down the outer layers of the personality in order to remove the resistances to make the self superconductive to the process of wiping out karma and avoiding reincarnation. In the West, on the other hand, as the Jungian model makes very clear, the whole process is just the opposite. Individuation makes the individual suitable to live in society and become a unique person, something unique and three-dimensional and original. And the process is designed to build up the personality and construct it, not to deconstruct it. Wilber misses all of this. You won't find, as most New Agers do, this is one of the main reasons why I left the New Age and dissociated myself from New Age thinking, because they slop and blend and blur all of these differentiations together to make it look like there is some sort of perennial philosophy in which all civilizations have all been trying to say the same thing to achieve union with the divine, whatever that means. Okay, so this explains why you won't hear me talking anymore about Jung, whom I no longer care for, because I have a long criticism of the damage that Jungian psychology did to the field of mythological studies. The hijacking of Jungian individuation and the Jungian theory of myth ruined the field of mythological studies by dominating it with such a dogmatic approach that no one can practice in that field who is not assumed automatically to be a Jungian, or who departs from the Jungian dogma. They become heretics. And so the field automatically excludes original thought. And as a result of that, it's turned a gun against its head and shot itself, because the field is now dead. Nothing new comes out of the field of myth studies, and I challenge anyone to find any new ideas coming out of there. I noticed this gradually as the decade of the 90s wound down. Nothing new coming out of the field of myth studies. It's over. It's a done deal. Entropy has taken over the field, and there's nothing fresh that can be said about it, and we have Jung to blame for this. And the New Agers' appropriation of Jungian ideas as a dogma that cannot be disputed or deconstructed, or, it's a typical metaphysical self-certainty that one system is the one true right system and that everyone else's system is wrong. So that's my criticism of the Jungian hijacking of the field of myth studies and the whole New Age slopping together and blurring the boundaries of all these careful, crucial distinctions that people like Spengler and even Rudolf Steiner to a certain extent get right, because they spend their time reading instead of going to social events and yogic classes and so forth. So these are the different models of the soul, and they're all very different, and they're mutually incompatible. And we're living in an age of syncretism that corresponds to the Roman imperial syncretism, the age in which this civilization is declining, and since it's already actualized its own unique worldview, as Spengler puts it, the Kultur period in the Roman case was long since in the past. They had already actualized what their unique point of view was going to be. Therefore, by the time of the Roman Imperium, they were open to new ideas. Their own sense of self was weakening, and so in come all the astrology cults, Mithraism, Mandeanism, Monarchianism, Zervanism. All of these new cults begin to come in, and it becomes, by nature, very eclectic, and people start putting together new systems. Mithraism is one of these, which is based on taking bits and pieces from all these different traditions, and Alexandria was perfectly situated to do this. And so we find that if you read the Corpus Hermeticum, which was a collection of texts produced in Egyptian Alexandria at this time, of course at this time Alexandria was no longer Egyptian, it was a melange of Egyptian and Syrian and Greek, Semite and Indo-Aryan, and these ones and those ones, all mixed together in a giant cosmopolis, the way our Western world cities are today. So if you read the Corpus Hermeticum, you will also find in the Corpus Hermeticum an Egyptian Greek equivalent of the model of the Sheads. I've forgotten what the vocabulary is for that. I would have to go back and look at it, but it's in there. I remember being struck by it, that it was the exact same doctrine, except with Neoplatonic connotations. There the soul was something that falls through the planetary spheres and is captured in a body, and the life is determined by astrological influences, and the only way to break free, instead of karma, we have astrological determinism in the Gnostic Neoplatonic model, and the only way to break free from that, the attainment, the equivalent to the attainment of moksha in that system is gnosis, is the opening up of the psyche in such a way so that it becomes, in a feminine way, receptive to the pneuma, the spirit that comes down in it, illuminates it, lights it up, and makes it realize that it is not this stuff, this material stuff, as Yoda puts it in The Empire Strikes Back. It's not this physical body that we are. It's this deep inward light, this spark of light that has fallen through the spheres and has become occluded and weighted with material densifications. There, instead of the sheaths, we have the planetary spheres, encasing the Sol in a miniature planetary series of models. As the Sol falls down through these spheres, it picks up temperaments and qualities from each one of these spheres. From Mars, it picks that. Let's look at the model. Actually, it goes from Saturn. The Sol comes down through from Saturn. And if you want this model, by the way, it's available. You can find it in a single paragraph in Macrobius, in his commentary to the Dream of Scipio. Here it is.